Let's get ready to rumble!
Oh my God! Unbelievable! Down goes Frazier! That down goes
It's time! You're listening to New Mexico's only mixed martial arts and boxing podcast, The Low Blow, on AtomCombatSports.com and Fight Fans Radio. It's that time again. It is episode 185 of The Low Blow on Southwest Fight, USCombatSports.com. And the echo's trying to kind of throw me off here. US Combat Sports, SouthwestFight.com, and Fight Fans Radio. There we go. Almost forgot the third one. I'm Justin, joined by Jorge Hernandez. What's up, man?
What's going on, man?
Nothing much. On today's show, we're going to be discussing the big Legacy SC30 cards taking place this weekend at Route 66 Casino, just outside of Albuquerque here. We're also going to discuss some issues, I guess, in combat sports, both in boxing and MMA. We're going to discuss the whole Daniel Cormier, Dan Henderson situation. We're going to discuss John Jones being voluntarily drug tested yesterday. Errol Hawani was here from Fox Sports, so we'll discuss that. And we'll discuss some other combat sports news. But first, man, some housekeeping issues. As always, you can get in touch with the show through several mediums. First, through email, lowblow505@gmail.com. We're also available on YouTube, youtube.com/lowblow505. That has some awesome interviews with the participants of the Legacy 30 card tomorrow. We also have a bunch of other content, Bob Foster, Austin Trout, Jorge's awesome interviews. Please go check that out now. You can also check out Fight Fans Radio through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Ustream, and on Spreaker. We're also on Spreaker. We're also available on the Stitcher Radio app and on iTunes. Before we break down the combat sports news, we're going to preview this Legacy SC30 card, and we have a guest, Jorge.
Joining us is one of the best sports writers, especially MMA fighters in the state of New Mexico, from SWFight.com, my colleague, Phil Lujan. How you doing, man?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, pleasure to have you on. Tomorrow night, we're lined up to have a pretty big card. You'll be there in person to check it out. Holly Holm versus Juliana Vorner, Legacy FC30. What are your thoughts about this event? Do you think it's a good warm-up to, I guess, the UFC fights that we'll have in June here?
I really do. This Legacy card has a lot of pretty notable names from our area, and considering the UFC is making its first trip into Albuquerque, I think they put a lot of the best guys they could have put on the card to kind of give us a preview of what's to come for our locals. There's a lot of local guys on this card who I think with big wins could be fighting in June.
I guess let's go ahead and start off with the main event. Holly Holm and Juliana Vorner, the weigh-ins took place today. Holly Holm weighed in at 134.6, and Juliana Vorner weighed in at 134.8. Now, do you know a whole lot about Juliana Vorner? I mean, I unfortunately don't.
I've seen quite a few of her fights. I'm a little bit of a fight nerd. I YouTube a lot of fights. She's very tough. She's gone to a lot of decisions. She's very durable. She's pretty solid on the feet, but her ground game is probably her strength. I do know that, she's been to, I think, about four decisions in her career, which is about out of the 11 fights that she's fought in. So it should be a pretty solid one.
No, go ahead, Justin.
Oh, I was just going to ask, I guess with Holly Holm, just in terms of the media attention, I see, Channel 13, Channel 7, Channel 4, the local TV stations here in town, they love to cover Holly Holm. I guess the question is, if you can kind of get into her mind, Phil, Holly Holmes, about her focus with this fight, because there's been a lot of attention in terms of her in the UFC, her and money, a lot of these outside distractions that she seems kind of irritated when the media is kind of asking her these questions. Do you think she's truly focused on Juliana Vorner here? Because a loss would kind of ruin all the momentum that she has and all the goals that she foresees herself in the UFC one day. Where do you think her mind's at?
I think it's pretty safe to say that she's much more distracted than she would be in any other fight. It would be hard to argue against it. I mean, when you have so much attention on you and you have so many people asking you questions, from all these different websites and different, media sites, it has to take a toll on you. Even though she was a boxing world champion, it seems like as soon as her name got aligned to the UFC and a possible fight with Ronda Rousey, it just seemed that so many people, caught onto that bandwagon and they wanted to ask questions. And, but the thing is that she comes from a very good camp and she has good people in her camp. I think that they've trained her pretty well to prepare for situations like this, especially working with Mike Winklejohn. They seem to have like a really good relationship with one another where he can really balance her out. I read a lot of stories about her where, she talks about her nerves and how, Coach Winklejohn is calmed them. But, I think it does take a toll and it puts a lot of pressure on her because, like you said, if, she takes a loss in this fight, then all the talk and all the hype and anticipation of a UFC fight just goes right out the window.
How do you see this fight going down? It's the first. Let's not forget, it's the first 135-pound women's championship that Legacy actually has. I think we've on the show have failed to mention that it's for an actual title here.
Correct.
The first MMA title.
It's hard. I think Holly Holm has probably the best footwork of any woman fighter that I've seen in that weight class. And her ability to move and her ability to use kicks have always been one of her strongest points. And the thing about Juliana Warner is that she undoubtedly wants to get it to the ground. Holly's really good at spacing. I don't think that Juliana Warner can close the distance on her. I think it'll be a lot like her last fight where she uses distance and to land shots from the outside and picks her shots on the inside and gets out. It'd be really interesting if Warner gets the takedown, but it's just so hard to see, a girl who traditionally has always fought at 125 pounds to muscle Holly to the ground. I see her taking a decision.
Rather easily, or do you think there'll be much trouble there?
Well, the thing is that Holly moves around so much that I think Warner is going to chase her. So it feels to me that like if it goes into later rounds, she's going to wear Warner down. It's going to be, Holly's going to easily win the last three if it goes into the championship rounds. Maybe in the first two rounds, Warner will give her some problems, but I think she'll pretty handily take the decision.
Because this fight is nationally televised, and it's the first fight after the Holly Holm to the UFC hype that just ended recently. How much, if she were to able to put a dominant performance in, how do you feel, I guess, Dana White's mind might change about Holly Holm, or do you think it even would? Do you think she has a home in Legacy for a while?
I think it definitely matters on how the performance is. Not to take anything away from her last performance, but if it's similar to that, there's not going to be a whole lot of pressure for the UFC to bring her in. If she knocks this girl out, in an emphatic style the way she did some of her other opponents for Legacy, then I believe the pressure would be there. The thing is that nobody's ever doubted her talents, and I'm sure the UFC could really use and really value her talents. It's just all about that negotiation that everybody talks about. I think if the UFC could bring her in on a respectable deal that they brought other top girls in at, she would already be in there. Her talents have spoke volumes, and I'm sure that, her striking prowess has definitely risen some eyes all around the country as to what it would be like for her to fight those top girls.
Mm-hmm. To that point, what is the Legacy FC perspective of this? Because we've heard a lot about the UFC courting Holly Holm. What about Legacy FC? This is a big show in Albuquerque, right outside of here. If Holly Holm doesn't win, and let's say the negotiations with the UFC go badly, is there really a future as with Holly Holm as a long-term champion of Legacy, or do you see her possibly just going elsewhere to Invicta? Or, I guess my question is, do you see this title fight as a future division for Legacy, or do you see this kind of as a one-off, as a title fight to give Holly a belt?
For me, it seems like Legacy definitely wants Holly to stay there. She brings in money, and if Legacy's expansion to Albuquerque for this event speaks for their future plans, I'm sure there could be some shows down the road where they bring her back and showcase even somebody like Damasio Page or Leonard Garcia. So I definitely think Legacy wants to keep her there. I just don't know if there's depth in that division outside of the UFC and Invicta for them to keep giving her title fights at 135 pounds. I think that's one of the main issues. I think she could keep fighting for Legacy. I just don't know that they could keep lining up challengers for her at the title level to keep giving her 5-round fights.
What if the complete opposite happens? What if we see Juliana Vorner just choke Holm out in the first or second round tomorrow? How devastating will that be to Holm's career?
I think it takes away pretty much all the luster of it. I mean, it's unfortunate to have that opinion. I don't wish that to be the case, but the fact that she's undefeated and that she's run through all these girls with these spectacular knockouts is definitely the reason for the hype behind her, and the fact that she's a world boxing champion. But if she were to get submitted, I mean, that, fight fans will look at that as like, if this girl submitted her on the regional stage, what would Ronda Rousey do to her on the UFC level? So, I mean, I think a loss here completely takes it away. I think she still has a shot, but the thing is that, she had a long boxing career, so she's already in her young 30s. I mean, this could be the run for her to get into the UFC, and taking a submission loss, especially against, a girl like Juliana Werner, who's traditionally a 125er, would really hurt her chances.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because you mentioned, Phil, she's up there in age, and if she loses this fight, she might have to go into the UFC if they even want to sign her at a much more discounted rate. I mean, she certainly wouldn't get the big-time deal compared to if she won this fight. I want to ask you in terms of the undercard. There's a lot of fighters on here that we've seen appear on the Bellator undercard, such as Adrian Cruz, De Lovatos. We have some great names on here. A great fight between Nick Urso and Ray Borg. In terms of the fighters on this undercard, you mentioned the UFC coming here earlier. I guess, can you compare the excitement of appearing on this undercard compared to a Bellator? Granted, Bellator was on national TV, or at least the main card was. With these guys, the good showing here, is this more in audition to appear in the UFC than the Bellator card? Are these guys more excited? What's kind of the temperament of the fighters on the undercard? Because it's pretty stacked.
I think that fighting for this legacy card is definitely a better segue for them if they wanted to get into the UFC. Mostly because most of these guys that fought on Bellator or fighting on the dark matches or on the Spike.com portion of the show. These guys are going to be fighting on Access TV on the main card, which is a significant difference. And then in addition to that, I mean, you very rarely see Bellator fighters jump to the UFC. Legacy, on the other hand, is different. I mean, they are a segue for guys to go over to the UFC. Guys like Danny Pineda have made it straight from a big performance on Legacy to go to the UFC. Guys like Donald Sanchez and Nick Urso, Ray Borg, and even Henry Briones and Adrian Cruz are all guys that with the big performance, I could definitely see immediately jumping on the UFC's radar to bring onto the show in June. I mean, most of those guys like Donald and Adrian are big ticket sellers in Albuquerque, and they undoubtedly will bring a crowd with them.
Out of the fights, I guess, but I assume 4 of these fights will definitely be televised. Well, I guess let's go ahead and go fight by fight from the bottom up. Clint Roberts versus Martin Sano. Big local implications here. Clint Roberts has trained out of Jackson's, I believe, here in Albuquerque for 4 years, and Martin Sano, also a fighter out of the Southwest, out of El Paso's Bushido MMA gym. Did some training with Vanderlei Silva and the Diaz brothers a lot over the past year. How do you see that fight going down?
That fight's going to be one of the more exciting ones, I think. It's one of the ones that I've looked forward to a lot. It's a fight between two guys that I'm going to be very afraid to get in each other's face. Clint Roberts is a very good fighter. In his last fight, he was short, but he was very impressive in it. He has very good striking, very technical striking, and the fact that he has he's a sparring partner for a guy like Carlos Condit, who speaks very, very highly of him, tells you a little bit about his talent level. At the same time, Martin Sano from Bushido, those guys have always brought their A games to big events, and I would, never put it past a Bushido fighter to come in and play spoiler to a local guy. And Martin Sano's tough. Martin Sano, he's a big imposing figure, and he can finish the fight with punches. I think in his last fight, he finished the guy in under 30 seconds, and it was an all-out slugfest. So, if Clint decides to get in there and trade with him, Martin has some pretty big power. But if Clint works from the outside, I think he's more technically sound at this point in his career, and I think he can pick up the victory. It's not going to be easy, but I would lean towards the side of Clint.
Yeah, and I think, just to quickly I guess, wrap this fight up. If Martin Sano, I think the drop to this welterweight, I guess they're supposed to fight at welterweight. Sano was a little over. I'm not sure if he ended up making weight, but I mean, that's a pretty big cut for him. If the fight goes to distance, I think it's advantage Roberts. But if the fight ends early, it'll likely be a knockout from Sano, I think.
I could see that. Especially, because of how much power he carried at a higher weight class. But I think he only weighed in at 0.6 over, so that wasn't the biggest missed weight of the night. So I think he probably would have made it.
Yeah, we had a guy miss weight by 22 pounds or something like that. Is that so?
Yeah, something I can't explain.
Yeah, that's just unbelievable. Unless you were super last second, that's just unheard of.
Right.
One other fight here, local implications. Henry Brignones from Tijuana, Mexico. He's been training here at Jackson's for a while now. He's one of those guys that the UFC helped bring along here to help mold, ultimately to make it to the big leagues, against Adrian Cruz in a 135-pound match. Adrian Cruz, a big guy here in the local area, Albuquerque and Rio Rancho. Do you see this being a slugfest, or do you guys see these guys just wrestling the hell out of each other?
In Henry's fights, he's very explosive. He's very methodical, though, in his approach first. I mean, he's explosive when he finds his openings, but he's very patient. And the thing about Adrian is that Adrian can be very aggressive. So, a lot of it's going to come down to if Adrian makes mistakes or if he doesn't make mistakes. If he leaves himself open for counter shots, I think Henry can find his good shots. But the thing about Adrian is that there's not very many people that work harder than that guy. He, I know Adrian pretty well, and I've always known him to be one of the harder workers that I've known in at least in New Mexico MMA. But I don't really see it as a wrestling match. I think it's going to be more of a tactical stand-up fight. I think Cruz will look to push the takedown, but Henry's takedown defense is pretty solid. It might end up being, Henry negating Adrian on the takedowns and them having a kickboxing fight.
And I don't know a whole lot about Henry Brignones, so I mean I can't really, mention his style or who would have the advantage here. But I just think either way, it's a pretty good fight, especially at the point of each of the guys' career. Henry, if he were to win, he'd be on a brink to hopefully make the UFC sometime next year if they do end up showing up to Mexico. So it'd be good to have him on the card. And here, our next fight, the 125-pound flyweight fight. You don't have to give me a winner, but you got to tell me, who has the advantage where. Nick Urso out of Jackson's MMA here in Albuquerque against Ray Borg out of Fit NHB here. We are pumped about this fight. I can't think of a local fight, that I've been this excited about. How about you?
This is the same for me. I don't think I've ever been as excited for a local matchup in all the years that I've been doing MMA, watching MMA. This is easily probably. I've been arguing all week that this is the biggest fight in New Mexico's history, featuring two locals. I'm pretty excited. It's hard to say. Both guys are so talented. Both guys are so well-rounded in their craft. I see Nick's striking being very strong. He's very technical, and he has power in both his hands. And he's finished his last two fights with punches. And I see on the feet. I think I would say Nick would have the advantage. I just think Ray is the definition of a hybrid fighter. His wrestling is superb, and his grappling is some of the best stuff I've ever seen. If nobody's seen him grapple, I suggest you go to YouTube and just type in Ray Borg grappling, and it'll show you so many highlights. He has such crafty and mature grappling for being a 20-year-old fighter. It's hard to pick a winner just because both guys are so good, and both guys are right on the brink of breaking out and becoming their own. They're stars in their own, but. It's always been hard for me to argue against the younger wave of mixed martial artists. I just see them as being so talented. And when Ray Borg wants to get a takedown, I think he'll get a takedown. And I think that's going to be probably the biggest point of this fight is if Nick can stop Ray's takedowns, and if the takedowns happen, if Nick can get up from underneath Ray.
And I feel the same way. Who's ever able to implement their style. If this goes to the ground, I think it's advantage Ray Borg. But if Urso can keep it standing a little bit more, he might edge out a decision, but ultimately it'll be, who wins, the wrestler or I guess if Urso's ever to implement a nice striking style. But I think you would agree with me that both guys have the potential to eventually make the UFC someday, right?
I think both of them still will, regardless of the outcome of tomorrow. I think Ray's so young that if he were to get hit a loss, it'd be a big setback. But he's so young and so talented that there's no way I could see him not getting to the UFC if he continued to train as hard as he did. And Nick is such a top prospect in the area and in the flyweight division in general that a loss would be a big setback for him. But a string of 2 or 3 more wins after a loss, and he'd be right back up there.
Yeah, and Borg, I think, just has a little bit more room here with this one. This is a huge fight, a good performance, and if he wins, this is humongous for him at only 20 years old. If he loses, he still has the room to build up over the next few years to eventually still develop himself as one of the best 125-pounders, not just here locally, man. I mean, I think Ray, by the time he's 25, 26, he might be a household name by the time he gets to that age, if you were to ask me. Next fight. The co-main event, 145 pounds, a local legend, if you will, here, Donald Sanchez out of the area, against one of the more experienced fighters out of Brazil, and Flavio Alvaro. This is a big fight for Donald Sanchez. How do you think he'll live up to this co-main event status against such a veteran guy?
Well, it'd be hard to find anybody more experienced than Donald Sanchez, but somehow Legacy found one. They almost have 100 fights between them when they come into the cage tomorrow night. Yeah. So, Donald is a local legend here. I think he's one of the most recognizable local figures in Mexico MMA of all time. He's a very talented guy too. He just made the transition to Jackson's MMA from spending most of his career at Fit NHB, and he has a very solid, aggressive striking style. He comes forward, he throws a lot of punches, a lot of kicks, knees, elbows, basically whatever it takes to to land some strikes in. But Alvaro, he's tough too. Alvaro, I think he's been fighting for close to 10 years, and he's fought pretty much everybody in Brazil. I mean, he's fought 56 times. So it's going to be a good fight. I think Donald can live up to the hype of it. I think he can rise up. He's always been the kind of fighter who will bring an exciting style to a fight, and nobody leaves a Donald Sanchez fight disappointed. I do think he can win. I think it's going to be a hard fight, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a split decision. If it's a very close fight, but I think Donald will pull it off.
And again, these are just half the fights that are going to be on that card. You have a few amateur bouts taking place as well on this. So, if you're not doing anything on a Friday night, make sure you go check out the fights at the Route 66 Casino. Again, Legacy FC 30. It'll also be, for people not in the city, obviously, fight's going to be broadcasted on Access TV as well. So, Phil, we really appreciate you coming on. What's your Twitter handle, man?
My Twitter handle is King Lujan SW.
And you can catch all his fight previews and all his thoughts on swfight.com as well. He does an excellent job there. Phil, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, guys.
Jay, I can't remember this strong of a card with local fighters on it in a while. I mean, this has the potential to be, down the road in the future, 5 years from now, one of the better cards that's been put together here in the area. Agreed.
Yeah, and I think there's been a real care of pretty much creating some super matches locally. We kind of discussed that in terms of Bellator in the past, in terms of, I don't know, I know you've been a critic of this, Jorge, of, two local guys fighting each other, but I think for the most part, this is an incredible card. And like you said, Jorge, I think in the future, once most of these guys end up in the UFC, we're going to say this is kind of the starting point, this Legacy FC 30 card of most of these guys, getting their national exposure to the general MMA public. So I'm really looking forward to this card. There's going to be a lot of consequences, with the main event, of course. I guess I want to ask you, Jorge, I just saw the weigh-in video of Holly. There's a picture that's actually, I believe, on Southwest Fight News, and she looked kind of, I don't know, she didn't look so good on the scale, at least on my opinion, or this face-off pick. But the video I see online here, she doesn't look half bad. Do you think 135 is even, viable for her? I mean, can't she keep making these weight cuts? I mean, we discussed, Gina Carano and Cyborg, cutting down to 135. How about Holly? I mean, if she gets older, it's going to be more difficult for her to make these weight cuts.
No, it definitely is, especially as she's approaching her mid-30s here. But, an athlete's body, is used, especially, you know, when you're in boxing or MMA or any of these sports where you have to cut weight, the body is used to making a lot of these weights until you, of course, get older. We see a lot of these fighters move up in weight, one, because maybe they're not as active or in the gym as much as they used to be, or, you know, obviously because father time catches up to them, and we're not sure if, you know, Holly Holm's going to be able to maintain, you know, that weight for the next 3 years in her career. So that's why it was important for her to try to get Ronda Rousey here as soon as possible within the next year or two. But I mean, as far as Holm, I mean, she bounced around a lot when it came to her boxing career. I mean, let's not forget, she did fight, you know, from as small as, you know, when she first started, back in the early 2000s, as light as, you know, 136 pounds. So that's the lightest she's ever come in. And let's also, I mean, she did win a title in the in the light middleweight division in boxing, which is 154-pound limit, when she fought Mary Jo Sanders back in 2008, and that's probably the biggest win of her life, I think. She weighed at almost 153 pounds. So her body has been accustomed to going up and down, to cutting weight. I mean, when she was fighting toward the tail end of her career, her last two fights against Diana Prazic and Mary McGee, those were around the 138-pound range. So 135 really wasn't a weight that Holly was making, you know, since probably 4 years ago, 2010. So, you know, that is definitely something to think about. But, I mean, get this, if she fights at 145, a fight with Cyborg is even possible. I mean, the two of them, I don't know if they necessarily need Ronda Rousey to establish themselves as one of the pound-for-pound fighters, because if they were to fight each other and beat each other, they would be recognized as pound-for-pound number one, I think. And it doesn't even have to happen in the UFC.
Well, that's what I was, you know, wondering, too, is that's really the only, super fight that's available for her. The only question is, you know, they fight once, you get a rematch, and then what do you do after? I mean, 145 is not really that loaded, and really the destination or division that's available is in Invicta. I mean, it's not going to be in the UFC. Dana White's been pretty adamant about not adding a 145-pound division there. So, yeah, I think it's going to be fairly difficult to see whether or not her options after this fight, if she does not sign with the UFC. I think certainly with Invicta, they can offer her a decent deal, probably, you know, in terms of the organization's able to give her a pretty decent paycheck. Invicta's probably second on that list, so we'll have to see what happens there.
Jay, I'm looking at her BoxRec weights, and again, a lot of these are official, and sometimes they were provided unofficial information on BoxRec.com, which is the best website for records, especially boxing records, I should say specifically. The lightest I mentioned that she did weigh in, and I'm double-checking this as information they have right now, is 135. This means that out of that career that stretched from 2002 now to 2014, we're talking about 12 years, today was the lightest Holly Holm has ever been on the weight scale, ever. Wow.
Yeah. And so you mentioned Jorge, you know, her age. That all factors in there. I think that's going to be critical. Before we shift into discussing Sergey Kovalev and him calling out Adonis Stevenson, was there anything else you wanted to get off your chest, man, with 2 rounds?
No, not necessarily, man. Just my excitement for tomorrow night. And then people just, I mean, I don't know if they understand locally, so I know nationally they really don't understand. I mean, the potential that Ray Borg and Nick Russo fight have is just tremendous. I mean, either way, between that fight and the Clint Roberts, Sano, the Briones, and Cruz, you're bound to see one of the better fights of the year, I think. I think we will have a Fight of the Year candidate out of those 4 fights taking place on the Holly Holm undercard. So I'm just ecstatic. It sucks that I might even miss the card. I might have to watch it later just because, yeah, I'll be at a Celtics game all night, man.
You're traveling, yeah.
Yeah.
But Michael Schiavello and Pat Miletich should be here, so it should be very exciting to see them. I guess, because it's going to be kind of a short show tonight, but I want to ask you real quickly before moving on to the boxing. There was a big event, I guess, in the combat sports world. Eddie Bravo competed in Metamoris, is basically a jiu-jitsu kind of league. Have you heard of Metamoris before, Jorge?
Yeah, I had heard of them just because of some of the big matches that they've actually had. As far as their format, I'm not too big of a fan of their format just because you have so many draws that can take place. But obviously, as most, a lot of jiu-jitsu matches, despite the fact that there's not winner declared, most of the time you can tell who the winner is. I'm not the biggest jiu-jitsu expert, obviously, but there is some excitement in those. And this last matchup between them, I caught some of the highlights of it, and it looked very entertaining, and it looked like Bravo, dominated once again, and just goes to show that not necessarily, I don't know if you can call the Gracie's traditional jiu-jitsu, but Eddie Bravo stakes his claim as one of the greatest, grapplers here, I think, ever, or in recent history, obviously.
Yeah, he faced off against Royler Gracie in a rematch years ago. And people say it's one of the biggest upsets in the history of jiu-jitsu. I don't know, man. I can't get into this into the submission grappling, and it's not just jiu-jitsu. It's amateur wrestling too. I watched a little bit of the NCAA Collegiate Wrestling Championships. That's boring too. Like it is, just straight up. Like, I try, man. I try to get into it.
Boo that man. Boo.
I think one of the major problems is they don't really explain what's happening. The commentators don't. And for somebody who's new and somebody I really want to understand what's happening, it just seems very boring. I mean, we take a look with amateur wrestling. It's pretty much, okay, try to get the takedown. There's really not much going on. The reversals aren't that exciting, at least to me. I don't know. Sure. It just seems very boring compared to, I think, MMA, where there's the effort to finish. I think even with jiu-jitsu, at least there's submissions that are there. But even with Metamoris, I just don't see it very exciting. I don't know. It's just, maybe it's not my cup of tea, but certainly it's kind of dry, in my opinion. It's kind of like you have to really kind of appreciate it in order to be entertained by it. I don't know. I watched a little bit of that Metamoris 3, at least the main event of Eddie Bravo, Royler Gracie. I was impressed by the technique, but as for entertainment value, I was not impressed.
Yeah, no, and I completely see where you're coming from, especially when it comes to, you mentioned the NCAA Wrestling Championships that they have every year. That's, most of the time it is broadcasted on ESPN. There nationally. I mean, you're right. I mean, for people who are new to the sport, you just don't really understand it, or because of the commentator's lack of, I guess, ability to describe and convey what the moves mean and how important they actually are. But it's a passion that exists there. I mean, you go to some of these events and the crowds are in frenzies. You talk about some of the championships in, let's say, maybe the heavyweight divisions. 2 years ago, I got to go to the International Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Federation Championships there in Southern California. Just the passion that was there from these gyms from all over the world, obviously most of them American or Brazilian. It was just unbelievable to see them go at it in the championships, whether it's the heavyweight or maybe even the open division ones, where you might have an upset from one of the smaller belts or from one of the lower belts, defeating a black belt even. So I think it's like it's patience.
Sure.
For the and it's not for everybody. Just because you like MMA does not mean you're a big Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I guess these types of tournaments that we're talking about, you might not be a fan of them. It's different because that's why it's a different sport altogether.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I like the striking sports. I guess it's just my personal taste because it's instant gratification with striking. I will say, at least with Metamoris, it is presented way better. I do like Kenny Florian on commentary. I do like how you're focused on one match only compared to the NCAA Wrestling Championships where there's like 5 matches going on. So you're watching the match and the guy's talking about it, and then he'll talk about another match where you're not even watching. It's like they'll mention 2 other names. It's like, I'm not watching that match. I'm watching these 2 guys wrestle. What's happening here? That gets really confusing. So at least with Metamoris, it's presented in more of a fan-friendly way. But certainly I think with the NCAA Wrestling Championships, there's to be some work being done there. I want to ask you about Kovalev, man. Sergey Kovalev pretty much destroys Cedric Agnew. Kovalev moves to 24-0, handing Agnew his first professional loss on HBO Boxing After Dark. And watching these highlights, it pretty much seems like, I believe you said, Jorge, that Kovalev was a massive favorite. Didn't you say the odds were pretty ridiculous for this fight?
I think I saw one, and it might have been higher. It's something like 27-1. Obviously, Agnew, just because Vegas doesn't want to lose their ass when they make these types, they always make the underdogs odds a little lower. Meaning Cedric Agnew at the most was probably a 15-1 underdog because you might have a Buster Douglas situation where a guy comes 50-1 underdog and all of a sudden gets a lucky punch. So either way, you're favored by that much. It's just unbelievable. And I think, I thought, I guess I was close to my prediction. I said it would end before 6. It took 7. But what impressed me is Sergey Kovalev, it took him a little bit of warm up, despite the fact that he put Cedric Agnew down. Agnew did have some success early on within the first 2 rounds, but after Sergey finally started getting a little bit more technical, if you will, that's when he started hurting Agnew, and ultimately he went down a few times. But I mean, the most interesting thing that came out of this fight wasn't his performance, but what he said afterward when in the post-fight interview when Max Kellerman interviewed Sergey and asked him basically what he thought about, they sugarcoated it, but basically about Adonis Stevenson, the other champion in the light heavyweight division, basically jumping ship from HBO to Showtime for mostly managerial reasons. And, Sergey answered very poetically that he's a piece of, what? And what was comical about it is he said it, and then he followed up with his, broken English. Oh, I apologize for my English. Yeah, it was hilarious. So the guy won. He called somebody out, and he was funny when he did it. So, for Sergey to do that, it helped. I think him saying that, him being vulgar, made him stand out more than his actual performance that night. And I think it helps him because he's an undefeated fighter who flies under the radar. And I think we lost Justin. We're going to work on seeing if we can get him back on the air.
Oh, I'm back. Sorry.
There you go.
Sorry, I think I have my mic off. My bad.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, I agree with you. I think this is great for Kovalev. Sorry about that. I was talking to myself and no one's hearing me. But anyway, I agree with you. I think Kovalev, this really ups his stock in terms of people knowing who he is. And really, it got great ratings, too. Over 1 million viewers on HBO. So this is fantastic for him. Like you said, Jorge, last week, both these guys are on different networks. So in terms of putting together a decent fight between the two of them, I think that's the question mark. I mean, he creates this great hype, but in the end, are they going to fight each other? I don't know.
And also one of the more disappointing results earlier in the afternoon, well, not necessarily disappointing because we had the guy on as a guest before. Kareem Mayfield lost a unanimous decision to Thomas Delorme in a fight many felt was lackluster. I thought it was very interesting of a fight just because we saw guys trying to implement different styles. I mentioned to you, what did I mention to you last week, Jay? That Kareem Mayfield is a controlled, chaotic fighter. Mm-hmm. He did not show that Saturday night, and I think it's for one reason, because Virgil Hunter was basically in his corner, and Virgil Hunter, who of course trains fighters like Amir Khan and of course Andre Ward being one of the more fighters, but one of the more patient fighters in the ring. Kareem Mayfield turned into exactly that, a patient fighter who was being picked off from a distance and rarely did any fighting in the trenches. And that is not Kareem Mayfield's style. There were a few times that both he and Thomas Delorme hurt each other, but Kareem Mayfield might ultimately need to leave that Virgil Hunter camp and go back. Ben Bautista, who was the second trainer that day, also Ava Knight's trainer, a side note here, I think he needs to take the reins back from Virgil Hunter and guide Kareem Mayfield's career because, there's not much time for Kareem. He's already 33 years old, and his chaotic style, his controlled chaotic style, as I like to call it, was effective for him before this, and I think it would have done him a lot. But in this fight, he showed a lot of patience, and it came back to bite him, and Thomas Delorme goes on for a victory over an undefeated prospect. So pretty interesting that that you mentioned this fight had over 1 million viewers, especially because Agnew in the main event wasn't really known by many people, and the HBO commentators, according to the research, they found out that Agnew apparently sparred with Roy Jones Jr. once, who was a commentator that night. But when they asked Roy Jones if he remembered, he said he had no idea who the guy was.
Well, if you're Roy Jones Jr., I mean, you sparred with, maybe hundreds of boxers. I mean,
yeah.
You hardly, especially you've been hit in the head so many times. That's cliche to say, but it's true. It affects your memory. I mean, you sparred with this guy once. I mean, who knows? You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not like
must have forgot. Roy must have forgot that he
right. Exactly. Two more topics here real quickly. They're both really in the UFC light heavyweight division. Number one, it's looking like, now I'm not sure if this fight's official, but it seems like it's most likely to happen. Daniel Cormier to face Dan Henderson at UFC 175. What I understand is that whoever wins this fight gets a title shot. So whether Cormier is victorious or Dan Henderson gets to win here, either one's going to get a title opportunity against John Jones or Glover Teixeira. I'll say this flat out. Do you think Dan Henderson deserves a title shot over a win over Daniel Cormier, even though you have Alexander Gustafsson, who's rightfully the number one contender?
I mean, does he deserve it? No, I don't think so. But if Dana's saying this and putting it out there, it's going to happen. I mean, does Gustafsson deserve the next title shot? Yeah, I definitely think so, especially when you have Cormier ranked in the number 5 slot, and where was, I guess, Dan Henderson? Dan Henderson's right below him in step 6 there, or excuse me, spot number 6. So for the 5-6 guys to be vying for a world championship, it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, the winner, obviously, it really depends on who wins. If Teixeira wins, I think John Jones gets an automatic rematch. If you ask me, I think he deserves it.
I think so, too. I have to be careful what I say here, because the last time I underestimated a fighter, there was a fight of the year. Now it's Alexander Gustafsson. So even though I thought the fight would be fairly technical, I didn't think Gustafsson would hurt John Jones and almost win. With Glover Teixeira, I'm kind of thinking the same way, even worse. I think John Jones is going to destroy Glover Teixeira. I just think he's going to smash this guy. And to me, I just think I'm waiting to see Alexander Gustafsson fight John Jones again. Other than the power in his hands, I don't see Glover Teixeira as a challenge to John Jones. But you never know. I was wrong about Gustafsson. Maybe I'll be wrong about this. But I want to ask you, since we're kind of talking about John Jones, looks like he requested the UFC to perform random drug testing through the Maryland State Athletic Commission for him and Glover Teixeira. If you're watching UFC Tonight last night, Ariel Helwani was actually here in town in Albuquerque to interview John Jones. And while he was here, a divine intervention or a coincidence, the Maryland Athletic Commission just drug tested him. He undergo blood and urine testing here. We'll get the results later on. But I guess, what are your thoughts on fighters, kind of pressuring the UFC to do this? And I guess the question I want to ask you, Jorge, how would you feel if Golden Boy, all of a sudden commissioned an independent organization to issue drug testing? Would you find that a little bit suspicious of Golden Boy to do that? Would you think Golden Boy had the best intentions? Let's say, I don't know, or let's say it was Top Rank, because I believe Manny Pacquiao and Timothy Bradley, they're both under Top Rank. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And you're right. It would be completely fishy. You wouldn't know what to believe out of that. If you'd ask the average fan, they would just say, well, don't even test them at all if you're doing that, just because there might be something sneaky going on. But,
yeah,
I feel that, hopefully the Maryland State Athletic Commission does a good job of actually doing this, just because it's such a huge fight. And if anything were to come out of it and put a black eye on them, well, then that would be completely on them if they were to pull something like that. And they were, if someone found it out, if a journalist or something put them on blast, then yeah. But, I'm in favor of guys being tested, and, whether it's independent or not, if they can, show results. Ultimately, we don't know if any of the results are tainted or if they've been tampered with at all. We never know that in general, whether it's a very legitimate company or, someone like VADA, or even at the local level like Maryland State Athletic Commission.
I agree, and this is just weird because it's the Maryland State Athletic Commission. It's not like this is VADA or WADA or any of the other independent drug testing commissions here. This is the fight where it's taking place, the Maryland State Athletic Commission, and I guess UFC's footing the bill for this. I just wonder if the commission's doing this, why can't the UFC just foot the bill for every fight? I mean, if they're really serious about drug testing, I mean, why not foot the bill for every? I mean, that would make their lives a lot easier. You're paying the State Athletic Commission. I know it's a lot of money, but the UFC, I mean, they're now $1 billion company. I believe they can afford it. Would it be in their best interest to do this for every fight? Foot the bill if the State Athletic Commission can't afford it. And also, I guess those make GSP fairly happy too, since he's been behind, harder drug testing as well.
No, I definitely agree. And, I mean, why specifically for this fight? Do you think they don't trust Teixeira or?
I mean, John Jones requested it. John Jones in the interview with Ariel Helwani said that he's fought people that are on, steroids or HGH or whatever. He didn't mention names, so we don't know who. But he mentioned fighters in his past, were on the stuff that he had to beat. And so I think he's, certainly he's friends with George St. Pierre. It's the same kind of circle of camp with Jackson's Winklejohn and TriStar. I think, word got to him. He wants fighters to be drug tested, which I don't think is a negative thing. I just think you got to be careful who's issuing these tests. I mean, if this is just the UFC doing this, if this is just, they pay some company to handle this, I think it's a huge concern. But considering that this is the Maryland State Athletic Commission and the UFC is fronting the bill, I don't have too much of a problem. But it does open a can of worms if Teixeira tests positive. People are going to say, let's say Teixeira destroys John Jones and Teixeira tests positive. You open the can of worms saying, okay, the fix is in. They didn't want Teixeira to win. He did. And so automatically they give him his failed drug test, even though he might have actually failed. People are always going to say that because it's a combat sport. I mean, hell, people say that about the NFL. If there's a wrong call, the fix is in with the NFL. So the combat sports, you hear that all the time. So it's just, it's a good thing, but certainly it's going to raise some suspicions if Teixeira pulls off the upset.
No, I completely agree with you. It'll be pretty interesting, and it's just, for guys to be calling, I'm all for testing, whether the guy asks for it or whatever it might be. I mean, it should always be in place just to make sure all these guys are on a fair playing field. I
agree with you. Looks like that's going to wrap up our show, man. Anything else you wanted to add? It's WrestleMania weekend, Jorge.
Oh, man, I know. To be honest, if I were that's one of the, I guess. So what, can I still order it, or do I have to go through this special WWE website now? How does that work? Can I still order it on pay-per-view, or how does that work?
You can. I don't, to tie it in with MMA so we don't irritate the MMA fans that hate pro wrestling. Basically, compared to UFC Fight Pass, the WWE, they're going pretty much all in with the WWE network. And what that means is that the cable distribution and the WWE have an agreement that the WWE is not supposed to undercut the pay-per-view providers. But they've done that by offering their pay-per-views for $10 a month on this WWE network. That's available through Apple TV, Roku, Chromecast, your laptop, your tablet, your cell phone. So basically there's two ways, Jorge. Since this is WrestleMania, you can either order it through DirecTV, Dish, whatever, as usual, because this is the biggest show of the year and the cable providers want that paycheck. Or you can go through the network and pay $10. Like, I have the network now, and it's awesome. Like, I love it. I think it's fantastic for any wrestling fan. It has so much content. And comparing it to the UFC, where the Fight Pass thing was just a way to put on their extra shows that Fox Sports didn't want, the WWE network is pretty much an initiative that the WWE's planned for at least 2 years. So they have a lot riding on this network compared to the Fight Pass, which is kind of, an extra thing UFC's offering. So when people compare the two, it's kind of a ridiculous comparison in my opinion. But yeah, Jorge, if you want to watch the show this weekend, I mean, the only thing is that if you pay $10 a month, it is a 6-month commitment. So you'll have to pay for it $10.
So it's like I'm buying it. It's like I'm buying it either way because I probably won't see it again.
Basically, I mean, if you want, but you watch WCW though. You're a big fan of WCW. All the old pay-per-views are on there.
Oh, the old school.
Going back to the 80s, I mean, all the NWO, Great American Bash. I mean, you pay $10 a month. It's a great value. Even if you hate the WWE now, you just want to watch the classic stuff. I mean, it's probably worth it if you only want to see WrestleMania.
Let's leave the past in the past, Jay. Those were the good times. Let's not reminisce, because then I'll start crying.
It's true. The good
I'll
old
shed
days.
one. R.I.P. Gorilla Monsoon.
That's right. Well, hey, your boy Sting, he could be on the show this weekend.
Oh, that should be
He's in New Orleans, so we'll see.
All right, man. Enjoy the fights.
I will. Yep. Enjoy Legacy FC30, a huge card. Please go check it out. Please support local MMA. These are the cards that get the UFC's attention, even though they're coming here. If there's a low attendance for tomorrow, I think that's going to reflect badly on the show coming in June. So please go check out the show. Please go support Holly Holm, the rest of the fighters on this card. Again, you can always find us on social media, YouTube, Facebook, and on Twitter. Please go check out the latest interviews that Jorge's done for this Legacy SC30 card, youtube.com/LowBlow505. We're always on Stitcher, Spreaker, and on iTunes. Go check out Fight Fans Radio on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Ustream. So, man, enjoy your trip to Boston. Enjoy Beantown. Have fun there, man.
All right, man. Sounds good. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to episode 185 of The Low Blow. We thank Phil Lujan for coming on to the show. Really appreciate it. We will see you next week. Enjoy the fights this weekend.
Peace.